Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Myth and Meaning. This episode is titled Goku Adam, and that is because we're going to be talking about Goku today. But before that, just a little background. I'm your host on the left, Owl.
I'm your host on the right, Brok.
And we also run a podcast called Get the Mic, where we do basically this process live. These are more produced videos. But anyhow, let's get on with it.
Let's get right into it.
The picture here, did you want to go ahead and mention that?
I think the picture is significant because Adam represents this sort of duality, right? He's reaching up to the mythological spiritual, right? But he's separate from it. It's sort of this bridging between the ego and the shadow. It's sort of the conscious and the unconscious, right? The reverence towards the unknown versus the known. And I think that that's something that's a little bit different from, you could say, Monkey.
Well, he's also earthbound.
Right. And he's earthbound in that he is not an earthling, and he has a tail, whereas other people don't have a tail, right? And we'll get to that.
Well, Adam doesn't have a tail, but let's get on with it.
Well, Adam, as an image, does not have a tail, but it's sort of like, you think of a human with a tail, it's like that bridge between the two, right? The space between.
I see. So let's start off with this. We're talking about Goku's stasis. His reverence for nature, his mastery of that domain, his reverence for ancestry, which also I wanted to mention comes along with the Japanese culture.
Right, I think that this might represent an ancestry that transcends just Japanese culture. I think that the idea of Toriyama making this and referencing Journey to the West is to say, like, I'm showing a respect for Eastern culture more than just Japanese culture, right? And he's sort of embodying this, as he wants to actually explore the idea of the uniting of the Eastern and Western towards a more balanced mythology. I think that he has to subvert originally his own dogmatic Japanese culture, right? He has to go beyond and say that he wants to show a reverence for all cultures. And I think that's why Dragon Ball is so universal, right? And Goku's reverence towards the 4-star ball here, I think, is a reflection of that. From the very beginning, we see that that's going to be the foundation of what we're seeing.
Well, also I put the analog there in the heraldry from the British Isles, let's say, and that's Scotland and England, the Scottish and English flags, respectively. Because the idea of that ancestry is not just an Eastern thing, and that's why it kind of speaks, I think, to Western audiences. Ancestry, as far as his earthen ancestry as well. Not specifically talking about his tail yet, but I do want to mention the power pole briefly.
Yeah, the power pole being the thing that he has inherited from not his biological grandfather, but the idea of his grandfather, right? His sort of inherited grandfather as such. Or, you could break out the etymology of grandfather as in an actual, the great father or the father as such, right?
Well, I mean, in the larger context, we know that Goku has celestial parents and earthen parents, and his earthen parent, let's say, is Gohan.
Right.
And to which he pays respect in the very beginning, automatically, even after he's mastered the earthen domain.
Well, I think that it's just important to point out that he's not like his father, right? He's his grandfather. Like, he is the idea of the fatherly spirit, right, that he has. And so that's core to his sort of identity from the very beginning. But yeah, I think that's basically that's the foundation of what Goku is, moving into our discussion of how he embodies other elements of the culture, I think that we should point that out first and foremost.
And here's more of that, the power pole specifically, which is kind of where we're going next. This, as you can see in the flashback, was given to him by Gohan, and we know later on it can expand, it can extend, and it's representative of that ancestral knowledge that is almost limitless in its reach.
Yeah, I think it's sort of the inherent weapon that you have when you truly have a reverence for your ancestry, right? It's the wisdom that you can pull from your ancestry, and it extends forever. I think Yamcha refers to it as the pole that extends forever whenever he sees it. And I think that Yamcha recognizes it, even though he doesn't have it, because that is something that it's a part of Goku, I would say.
Well,
It's
and the
part
other
of him when
thing,
we're introduced to him, right? So it's kind of an extension of who he is.
right? But I think one of the big points too is that this is Goku's earthen parent, right? And just his earthen parent, it's the power pole is able to reach as far as it can go, meaning the value you can learn from people who have lived before you is the wisdom you can get is limitless.
Right, and that's based on the fact that you're younger than those people, first of all, right? So no matter how long you've been alive, it's never as long as sort of the earlier generation was, right? And so as far as known
You'll
and
never be
unknown
as old
goes,
as your parents.
yeah, no matter how much you focus on what they've learned, they've always had more experience than you. And that you can ultimately not devalue their experience if you truly respect your ancestry, right?
Which is what Goku does. And by doing so, he's really embodying that samurai spirit from, I don't want to say Japanese antiquity, but Japanese history, let's say. Meaning he has kept that reverence for his ancestry. That's part of the samurai culture. And his desire to be formidable, right? His self-improvement. And Goku does try to improve even when he's just in his earthen plane, let's say.
Right.
I also want to mention, too, that it's the addition of the samurai spirit, the individualism, and the rugged individualism as such, right? Because to mention how samurai existed in Japan at their height, let's say, is they were kings of their own castle. They were basically knights.
Yeah,
feudalistically,
they were more individual than knights, right? Like
mm-hmm.
their allegiance was to where they found honor across multiple allegiances, right? Or across multiple factions, right? And they were renowned by name, and it was sort of I think even more so than knights were. There was a higher level of individuation, you could say, with the identity, with the cultural consciousness, right? And we see that cultural consciousness coming out through Goku in his ethos that is sort of the embodiment that good equals the betterment of the self, right? That as far as you're able to contextualize and conceptualize the best in yourself, you are on your path to goodness, right? Or that path is good.
And it's on an individual level.
Right. It doesn't have to do with...
it's on the individual level.
Right. It starts with the 4-star ball, right?
Which I would say is one of the big differences between Monkey and Goku. Monkey from Journey to the West. One of the biggest differences is that Monkey that's not his message. That's not his messaging in the story. He is... almost omnipotent in his power. Like, he has to be restrained multiple times by the divine beings of the story.
Well, that's part of the struggle of characterizing potential, right? You take the idea of like the potential man as such, and like that's a character. It's like, okay, well, potential has no limits. That's why the power pole has no limits too.
Right.
So it's about finding a place for that limitless nature without watering down the story of the human sort of drama.
Mm-hmm. I also want to mention, though, that one of the things that Monkey does in the story is he tries to exceed the bounds of, let's say, the divine beings throughout his interactions with the other mythical creatures and problems they encounter on their journey to the West. Now, the way he goes about this is typically with violence. He typically tries to fight his way through the problems, right?
Right.
Goku is not, he's kind of moved beyond that. And I think that's part of the samurai spirit, is that samurai didn't, knights were more bloodthirsty, I would say.
I mean, you think of despining, right?
I mean, you think of the First Crusade.
Yeah, I mean, It's a lot more violent than the history books typically want to tell you whenever you're not all that educated. But you think of, there was a time period, a long time period, where like de-spining your enemies was a thing, where you would kill them and then cut the spine out of their body. Like, that was just part of killing them, right? And then we were like, maybe we should chill. Maybe like we should hold ourselves to like a perceived valor or a perceived honor, right?
Right, and that's exactly the let's say terms of engagement that were set upon by samurai,
Mm-hmm.
that were adopted, let's say, by samurai,
Well,
as well as the English, which is interesting to compare the two. But here, Goku's samurai spirit really, would say, distinguishes him from a strict analog to Monkey.
definitely. I think it definitely does.
And here we see that exact comparison. I think the imagery is what makes people so magnetized to this idea, because he also has a iron cudgel, is what it's called in the story, but it's not the same. It doesn't mean the same thing. It's not from his earthen parents. Monkey doesn't have earthen parents. He's kind of an immortal stone monkey.
Right. It's more mythological in a sense, but it doesn't have as much to say because Goku operates as a bridge between the two, right? Like, Goku is an iteration closer to our current experience that's more relatable and understandable.
Descriptive and prescriptive to what our current experience needs.
Right. So you might say, like, I took this thing away from reading Journey to the West. I'm going to try to articulate the feeling I got from it and the imagery I got from it, and then it comes through clearer, right? It's like Journey to the West is a lower resolution tale.
But it's not even the same tale, in my opinion, because a lot of what Monkey learns is humility. Goku's not overly...
Well, Goku never needs to learn humility, right? It's a response.
He's humbled occasionally.
Occasionally, right? But that's
it's
not
nothing,
part of his character.
It's nothing that he's already exceeding and then... Right.
He doesn't get the Dragon Balls because he is being humbled. They get the Dragon Balls because things exterior to him are being humbled, right?
And so, yeah, I would say they're very different characters, even from the start. From the first episode onward, you could say they're completely different characters.
Definitely.
I mean, look at this. When does Monkey do this? My point exactly.
Yeah, I don't want to go off on a long tangent, but I do want to point out. So one aspect of Goku that he embodies early on in the story is that he's self-sufficient in that he's always catching fish. He's feeding himself with fish. And then he's also able to use his tail to gather fish for his own sustenance. And if you delve into alchemy and astrology and what those symbols really mean, there's this aspect of sort of, this is his connection to his unconscious, right? He is more balanced as a biological entity because he has this connection to his unconscious. And he feeds himself with that. He nourishes his soul with that, right? And so that's why he is able to transcend the limitations of other beings. It's because he is closer to the self. And that's a Christ symbol that we're going to see. You know, that's why we're starting off with Adam and Eve.
But it's
because
not
we're working
it's
towards
more,
that symbology.
It's more than that because of what the tail will eventually mean. But for now, I think that's a good analysis.
It's a good springboard for what is happening thematically for the first season. It's a basis,
for sure. And that's the thing about Dragon Ball that's so brilliant, is that it builds upon existing mythologies and actually improves the messaging of them, and then moves on to a bigger hierarchy of mythologies and improves on that, and then moves on to what I think is the ultimate challenge of our generation in Z.
Well, we're a good ways from that, but I'm excited to talk about it.
But it's because I'm talking about it because of the tail, which is specifically...
Yeah, well, the tail runs throughout the story.
Yeah, exactly. And the tail is what separates Goku from Monkey, even though they both have tails, right? One is a humanoid with a tail, and the other one is a monkey.
Right.
Who's humanoid.
I mean, that's again a reinforcement of the idea that this is a response to Journey to the West. This is an iteration.
Yeah.
This is halfway between the two.
And I think here I wanted to mention that Monkey doesn't have the kind of the background. I briefly just want to mention Monkey's story is that he's a stone monkey who became king of the monkeys. That's why he's the Monkey King. And he caused a ruckus in heaven one time, and so God banished him to be chained up for 500 years, only for him to be set free to help a Buddhist monk travel to the West to get the scrolls of enlightenment. Along the way, he's humbled and taught a lot of character lessons, typical mythology. And in the end, he finds that those lessons were the enlightenment all along.
Now, this is a classical tale, right? This has a lot of parallels, so you could say like Satan and his fall, and the inherent dichotomy there between good and evil, right? Like, I like the idea that this Christ figure springs out of a Satan mythology, right? And that has to do with what Jung, we'll be coming back to Jung, but what Jung thinks of the Christ meme as such, that there are two halves to it, and that it is the embodiment of a balance between what we culturally think of as good and evil, right? So what Goku is, he kind of is like the step. He's a step beyond that. He's to say like, okay, I have now gone into a higher resolution of what good and evil really are, right? And so now he's further towards the logos. He's further towards the logic, but he still has the reverence, right? He's carried it on sort of as a message that needs to go on from generation to generation.
And that's the big thing about this picture is that Goku is set up through the strength of his ancestry to be successful. And because of his reverence and because of his acknowledgement of that and what he's learned, he's able to succeed. And so let's move on to the first real event of the story next time when we talk about how Goku and Bluma interact.
Right, the original interfacing of the masculine and feminine in the mythology of Dragon Ball.
I love the snake Lilith up there. I never even noticed that.
Oh, I didn't even see that before.
Oh my goodness.
It's pretty great.
So, this was the second episode of our series, Myth and Meaning, about Dragon Ball. Next time, we're going to talk about Bulma, as we said. So catch us next time. Owl out.
I'm your host on the right, Brok.